Hold fire. Stand by for coordinates.
Acknowledged. Standing by. I have visual confirmation. If I don't drop him, they burn. Negative. Stand down. No. No.
Sierra 1, hold fire. I repeat, hold fire. You do not have PID. The voice in the earpiece was jagged, stripped of static but heavy with a command that felt like a noose. Command, I have visual confirmation on the trigger man, Lily whispered, her breath barely fogging the scope's lens. The heat shimmering off the valley floor distorted the air, but her vision was absolute. He's holding the detonator. Dead man switch. Negative, Sierra 1. Intel says the target is in the convoy, not on the ridge. If you take that shot and you're wrong, you compromise the entire extraction. Do not engage. Lily's finger hovered over the trigger of the Mk-13 Mod 7. Through the magnification, she saw the man's thumb twitch. He wasn't waiting for the convoy to stop. He was waiting for it to enter the kill box. Her team, his team, was 3 seconds from the blast radius. Commander, Lily said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the formal edge. If I don't drop him, they burn. And if you miss, or if you're wrong, we start a war we can't finish. Stand down, Lopez. That is a direct order. The wind shift was full value left to right. A difficult shot, a career-ending shot, a life-saving shot. She exhaled. The world went silent. Lopez, I can... Crack. Transmission breaks. Silence. 48 hours earlier, forward operating base, Copperhead, the Sahel. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and aggressive air conditioning, a sharp contrast to the furnace of the Sahel waiting outside the blast walls. Chief Petty Officer Lily Lopez sat at the back, her spine pressing against the cold metal of the folding chair. She didn't lean forward. She didn't fidget. She simply existed, a quiet variable in a room full of loud constants. In front of her, the projection screen illuminated a satellite map of the extraction zone. Red circles marked the known insurgent strongholds. Blue lines marked the infill vectors. But Lily wasn't looking at the map. She was looking at the back of Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne's neck. Insertion will be halo, high opening to minimize acoustic signature, Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded the room effortlessly. He turned his gaze sweeping over the 6 men before landing, heavy and unblinking, on Lily. Sierra 1, you'll be dropping with the heavy ruck. Can you manage the descent rate with the Mk-13? The room went quiet. It wasn't a question of capability, it was a public audit. Affirmative, Commander, Lily replied, her voice flat. Drag coefficient is calculated. I'll be on the deck 5 seconds after the main element. Thorne held her gaze for a beat too long. Check your rig again, Chief. We can't afford you drifting into the village because you couldn't handle the payload. Copy that. She didn't blink. She knew what he was really seeing. He wasn't seeing a veteran sniper with 42 confirmed kills. He was seeing a crumpled piece of paper in a trash can in Coronado 5 years ago. You're a distraction, Lopez. Biology is a liability. Go find a desk. He had torn her application in half, the sound like a bone snapping in the quiet office. The briefing dispersed. The men moved with the easy camaraderie of brothers, shoulder checks, crude jokes, the rhythmic clatter of gear being checked. Lily moved in her own orbit. She walked to the prep table, her hands finding the familiar, cold reassurance of her rifle. The Mk-13 Mod 7 was a beast of precision. She ran her gloved fingers over the Remington 700 long action, checking the mounting screws of the Night Force scope. Every turn of the wrench was a meditation. She didn't need their jokes. She needed zero. You're packing heavy on the 300 Win Mag, a voice said behind her. It was Thorne. He was standing too close, invading her workspace. Standard loadout plus 2 mags, sir, Lily said, not looking up from the bolt she was lubricating. We're moving fast. Weight is your enemy. Running out of ammo when the extraction goes sideways is the enemy, sir, she corrected, finally looking up. Thorne's jaw tightened. He hated that she was right, but he hated more that she was here to be right. This isn't a training range, Lopez. The wind in the wadi swirls, it's unpredictable. If you miss a call because you're fatigued, I don't get fatigued, she lied. Her shoulders ached from the training ruck earlier that morning, but she would rather die than show it. And I don't miss calls. Thorne leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that didn't carry to the rest of the team. I didn't want you on this op. You know that. Command pushed the roster. I know, Lily said, snapping the bolt back into the receiver. The metallic clack was final. But I'm the one behind the scope. So unless you want to take the shot yourself, Commander, I suggest you let me pack my gear. For a second, the air between them crackled, charged with 5 years of resentment and professional friction. Thorne looked like he wanted to say something else, perhaps to remind her of the hierarchy, or perhaps to justify the doubt that aided him. Instead, he stepped back. Wheels up in 30 mics. Don't be late. He walked away. Lily watched him go, her hand gripping the rifle stock until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't fighting the enemy yet. She was fighting the ghost of that torn paper, proving over and over that she belonged in the violent silence of the battlefield. She checked her watch. 29 minutes. She pulled the charging handle back, inspecting the chamber one last time. It was clean. It was ready. Whether Thorne was ready for what she could do was another matter entirely. Well, the ramp of the C-17 dropped like a jaw unhinging, revealing a gaping maw of black nothingness. The roar of the engines, previously a dull thrum inside the pressurized hull, instantly became a screaming physical force. Inside the cargo hold, the red tactical lights bathed the SEAL team in the color of fresh blood. Lily stood near the rear of the stack, checking the seal on her oxygen mask. The air at 25,000 feet was thin and lethal, a void that would starve the brain in seconds without the supplemental O2. She traced the hose down to the console strapped to her chest, verifying the flow. Oxygen check, the jumpmaster bellowed over the internal comms, his voice fighting the wind shear. Good flow, Lily murmured, her voice distorted by the mask. She checked the altimeter on her wrist. The numbers glowed a faint, radioactive green. Thorne was 3 spots ahead of her. Even in the bulky jumpsuit and with the oxygen mask obscuring his face, his posture was unmistakable, rigid, controlled, radiating a tension that rippled back through the line. He turned his head slightly. The 4 tubes of his GPN VG-18 panoramic night vision goggles looking like the eyes of a giant spider. He wasn't looking at her, but she felt the weight of his scrutiny. Don't drift. Don't fail. Green light. Go, go, go. The line surged forward. One by one, the bodies vanished into the abyss. Lily reached the edge of the ramp. She didn't hesitate. She stepped out into the void. The transition was violent. 1 second she was on stable metal. The next she was plummeting into a sub-zero hurricane. She arched her back, stabilizing her fall, spreading her limbs to catch the air. The heavy ruck strapped between her legs, containing her rifle and mission-critical gear, acted as a pendulum, threatening to flip her, but she fought the physics with practiced muscle memory. Terminal velocity hit. The world became a blur of wind noise, a deafening static that paradoxically created a profound silence in her mind. Up here, there were no snide comments, no torn applications, no doubts. There was only drag, gravity, and the math of survival. She activated her NVGs. The world turned into a grain-filled green landscape. Below the desert was a dark ocean of shadows. She scanned for the IR strobes of her team, tiny pulsing stars in the darkness below. Sierra 1, good track. Sierra 2, on vector. Then she saw it. To her right, Sierra 4, Miller, was drifting. Badly. A sudden shear wind had caught him, pushing him hard toward the jagged ridgeline east of the drop zone. If he pulled his chute there, he'd be shredded by the rocks or hung up on a cliff face, a sitting duck for any patrol with eyes in the sky. Sierra 4, check your heading, Lily transmitted. Her voice was calm, but the urgency was there. Static. Miller didn't correct. He was spiraling slightly, possibly disoriented by the transition or suffering from hypoxia if his mask seal had broken. Thorne was below, holding the center line, unaware of the straggler above. Lily checked her altimeter. 12,000 feet. Pull altitude was 4,000. She had seconds to decide. If she stayed on her vector, she would land in the sweet spot, perfectly grouped with Thorne. If she went after Miller, She would be pulling herself out of the safe corridor and into the same unpredictable currents that had snagged him. Biology is a liability. Screw it, she whispered. Lily dipped her shoulder, banking hard to the right. She turned her body into a tracking missile, diving aggressively to close the distance. The wind screamed in protest as she accelerated, the G-force pressing the goggles into her face. She closed on Miller. He was flailing, fighting a spin. She could see his altimeter flashing. He was losing altitude too fast. She maneuvered within 20 feet of him, a dangerous proximity in freefall. She flashed her IR beacon rapidly, 3 short bursts. Look at me. Miller's head snapped toward her. The visual lock seemed to ground him. He stabilized, mirroring her body position. She pointed sharply to the left, back toward the main group. He nodded, correcting his drift, pulling away from the ridge. He was safe. But Lily was now caught in the updraft he had just escaped. Her altimeter screamed, 4,500 feet. She reached for the ripcord. Crack. The canopy deployed with a violence that knocked the wind out of her. The harness bit into her thighs and shoulders, checking her fall instantly. She looked up. The chute was fully inflated, a dark gray bloom against the stars. But the wind wasn't done with her. The delay to save Miller had pushed her too far east. She was no longer over the soft sand of the primary DZ. Below her, the ground was rising fast, too fast. Uneven terrain, rocks. Sierra 1 to command, she gasped, steering the toggles with all her strength to fight the crosswind. I am off course. Repeat, off course. Correction, Sierra 1, Thorne's voice cut in, cold as the air around her. You broke formation. Explain. Turbulence, she lied, knowing he wouldn't buy it. Sierra 4 is clear. I'm landing hard. The ground rushed up to meet her, a mess of shadows and jagged edges. This wasn't the flat desert floor. This was the scree field at the base of the mountains. She flared the chute at the last second, but the ground came up at an angle. Her boots slammed into loose rock. She performed a PLF, parachute landing fall, rolling to dissipate the energy, but the impact was brutal. Her ruck slammed into her side and her helmet cracked against a stone. She slid 10 feet down the slope, gravel tearing at her uniform before coming to a halt. Silence returned. Heavy, suffocating silence. Lily lay still for a moment, waiting for the pain to register. It came, a sharp throb in her left knee, the ache in her ribs. But nothing felt broken. She reached for her chest, feeling for the rifle case. It was intact. She pulled off her oxygen mask, taking a breath of the real air. It was dry, dusty, and hot, retaining the day's heat even at night. Sound off, Thorne's voice crackled in her ear. Sierra 1, boots on deck, Lily whispered, scanning the dark horizon. She was alone. I'm 2 clicks east of the rally point. You're in the blind spot, Thorne replied. Get moving, we're not waiting. Lily cut her risers, bearing the chute under a pile of rocks. She checked her compass. 2 kilometers in this terrain would take an hour. She had 30 minutes before the moon rose. She racked the charging handle of the M13. The mission hadn't even started, and she was already fighting for her life. Lily moved like a shadow detached from its owner. Her left knee screamed with every step, a sharp, grinding reminder of the hard landing. But she pushed the sensation into a mental box labeled ignore. She had covered the 2 kilometers to the rally point in 19 minutes, a pace that left her lungs burning in the dry, thin air. The rally point was a cluster of boulders at the mouth of a dry wadi. As she approached, she didn't see them, but she felt them. The darkness shifted slightly. A hand signal flickered, a flat palm pressing down. Freeze. Sierra 1 on station, she whispered into her comms, stopping instantly. A figure detached itself from the obsidian black of a rock face. It was Thorne. Through her NVGs, he was a grainy green giant, his rifle muzzle lowered but ready. You're late, Thorne said. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He didn't ask about the landing. He simply checked his watch. We lost 6 minutes waiting for you. That puts us behind the moon cycle. Gear is functional. I'm green, Lily replied, keeping her voice devoid of the defensive edge she felt rising in her throat. Fall in rear. Watch our 6. If we get flanked because you're limping, I'm leaving you behind. Copy. The team moved out, sliding into the wadi like water seeking the lowest ground. The formation was tight, a ranger file tailored for the narrow winding canyon. Thorne took point, followed by Miller, Davis, and the rest of the assault element. Lily brought up the rear, the heavy MK-13 slung across her chest, her MP-7 submachine gun in hand for the movement phase. The desert at night was a noisy place. The wind whistled through the canyon walls, sounding suspiciously like distant whispers. Every crunch of a boot on the gravel sounded like a gunshot to Lily's heightened senses. She scanned the ridgelines constantly, her neck swiveling, trusting the peripheral flicker of the night vision tubes. They had been moving for 20 minutes when Thorne raised a fist. Halt. The team dropped to one knee in unison. The silence that followed was absolute. Patrol, 12 o'clock, high ground. Thorne's voice was a ghost in her earpiece. Lily shifted her gaze up. On the ridge, 300 meters out, silhouettes moved against the star-cluttered sky. Two men, slung rifles. They were smoking. The tiny flares of heat from the cigarettes bloomed white-hot in her optics. They weren't looking down into the wadi. They were bored, complacent. Pass, don't engage, Thorne ordered. Strict ROE. We are ghosts. They waited. The minutes dragged, heavy and thick. Lily watched the glowing embers of the cigarettes, calculating the angle. If they looked down, they would see the IR strobes if anyone had been foolish enough to leave them on. But the team was disciplined. They were invisible. Once the patrol moved on, Thorne signaled the advance. The wadi narrowed, forcing them into a single file path that snaked between jagged limestone walls. It was a natural choke point, a tactical nightmare. If they were engaged here, there was nowhere to go but forward into fire or backward into the open. Thorne picked up the pace, eager to make up the lost time. He was moving confidently, his eyes scanning the horizon, the high ground, the tactical threats. He was looking for shooters. He wasn't looking at the ground. Lily, trailing 10 meters behind, swept her gaze low. It was habit, a sniper's habit of reading the terrain for hides, for disturbances, for things that didn't belong. She saw it, a glint. It wasn't much. Just a faint, unnatural reflection of starlight on a thin filament stretched across the path, 10 feet in front of Thorne. It was too straight to be a spiderweb, too low to be a vine. Freeze! Lily hissed, breaking radio silence with a volume that made the team flinch. Thorne didn't freeze. He took another step. Thorne, stop! She didn't use his rank. She didn't use his call sign. She used his name, stripping away the military veneer in a moment of raw panic. Thorne stopped mid-stride, his boot hovering inches above the dust. He crouched slowly, turning his head back toward her, his face mask obscuring his expression, but his body language screaming fury. Lopez, you better have a 12 o'clock, low, 3 meters, tripwire, she interrupted, breathing hard. Thorne looked down. He engaged the IR illuminator on his rifle, casting a focused beam of invisible light that only they could see. There it was, a copper wire thinner than fishing line strung between two rocks at ankle height. It ran into a disturbed patch of earth near the canyon wall, a pressure plate or a buried 155mm shell. If Thorne had planted his boot, the entire lead element would have been vaporized. The silence that followed was different from the waiting silence. This was the silence of a bullet that had missed by inches. Thorne stared at the wire. He slowly retracted his foot. He motioned for the EOD tech, Davis, to come forward. Davis inspected the rig, sweating despite the night chill. Crude, Davis whispered, but effective. Daisy-chained. Looks like it would have brought the canyon wall down on us too. Davis marked it and bypassed it. The team navigated around the death trap with agonizing slowness. When they were clear, 50 meters up the wadi, Thorne signaled for a short security halt. He walked back to where Lily was kneeling, scanning the rear. He stood over her. Lily looked up, bracing herself. She had shouted. She had used his name. She had broken protocol. Thorne looked at her, his green glowing eyes unreadable. He tapped his chest twice, then pointed at her. It was the universal sign for, "My bad, good catch." "Maintain interval," he said on the private channel, his voice tight. "Good eyes, Sierra One." "Just doing the job, sir," she replied. He turned back to the front. The apology wasn't verbal, and the gratitude was thin. Lily knew what he was thinking. He was the leader, the veteran, the one who tore up applications because he knew better. And yet, the liability had just saved his life. It didn't bridge the gap between them. If anything, it widened it. Now he owed her. And for a man like Elias Thorne, debt was a form of weakness he couldn't tolerate. "Move out," Thorne commanded. Lily stood up, the pain in her knee forgotten. They had survived the night's first test, but as they climbed toward the observation point, she knew the real test wasn't the enemy. It was the man leading them, and the pride that might get them all killed before the sun even rose. The sun in the Sahel didn't just shine, it pressed down with the weight of a physical object. Lily lay prone on a ridge of jagged limestone, 300 meters above and 800 meters out from the target village. Her hide was a shallow depression in the rock, draped with camouflage netting that blended seamlessly with the ochre and gray of the escarpment. Underneath the net, the temperature was pushing 45 degrees Celsius. Sweat trickled down her forehead, stinging her eyes, but she didn't wipe it. Movement was death. Instead, she blinked rapidly to clear the salt, her eye never leaving the ocular lens of the MiG-13. "Sierra 1 established," she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath, picked up by the throat mic. "Copy, Sierra. Send traffic," Thorne's voice replied. He was down in the valley, staging the assault team in the dead ground behind a grove of withered acacia trees. Lily shifted slightly, checking the Kestrel weather meter mounted on a mini tripod next to her rifle. The little device spun lazily. Wind is full value, left to right, 4 miles per hour. Temperature 113 Fahrenheit. Density altitude is high. Check your ballistics for drag. She pulled her data book from her sleeve pocket. Beside her rifle lay a hand-drawn range card, a sketch of the village with predetermined distances to key landmarks. The well, the mosque tower, the main compound gate. She had ranged them all with her laser before the heat shimmer became too severe. Now the air over the valley floor was boiling. Through the scope, the village looked like it was underwater, the lines of the buildings wavering and dancing in the mirage. "Target building is the 2-story structure, north side," Thorne transmitted. "Intel confirms HVT is inside. We move on my command." Lily dialed the focus on her scope, trying to cut through the atmospheric soup. She swept the village, looking for the pattern of life, the unconscious rhythm of daily existence. Goats moving, women carrying water, children playing in the shade. There was nothing. The village was a ghost town. The dust streets were empty. The shutters were closed. "Command Sierra 1, Lily said, a knot forming in her stomach. "I have negative PID on civilians. The village is cold. Too cold." "Intel reports the locals fear the warlord." Thorne shot back instantly. "They're hunkering down. Maintain watch." Lily gritted her teeth. Fear made people hide, yes, but fear didn't make the goats disappear. Fear didn't stop the wind from blowing laundry on a line. There was no laundry. This wasn't a village in fear. It was a village that had been sanitized. Then she saw him. On the second-floor balcony of the target compound, a man stepped out. He wore the white thob and red shema described in the dossier. He held a radio in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He leaned against the railing, looking casually out toward the valley. It was too perfect. A warlord who knew he was being hunted didn't stand on an open balcony in the middle of the day. He didn't wear bright white. He didn't smoke where a sniper could see the cherry. "I have eyes on the HVT," Lily said, her thumb hovering over the safety. "Balcony, Sector Bravo." "Confirmed," Thorne said, his voice tightening with anticipation. "We have the green light. Preparing to breach." "Wait," Lily said. The word came out before she could filter it. "Commander, hold. He's presenting himself." "Say again?" "The target. He's standing in the open. No security detail visible. No body armor. He's looking right at the approach vector." Lily watched the man through the wavering heat. He took a drag of the cigarette. The movement was stiff, rehearsed. "He looks like he's waiting for an audience. It feels wrong. It feels like a lure." "Feels?" Thorne's voice dropped. That octave that signaled his patience had evaporated. "We are not operating on feelings, Chief. We are operating on actionable intelligence from the CIA. That is our man. That is the timeline. Look at the environment, sir. No livestock. No trash. This area has been prepped. We are burning daylight, Sierra 1. If we wait, we lose the element of surprise. You don't have the element of surprise, Lily insisted, the panic rising in her chest. He knows you're coming. I'm telling you, that man is bait. There was a long pause on the comms. In that silence, Lily could imagine Thorne's face, the tightening of the jaw, the cold calculation. He was weighing the mission parameters against the female intuition he so despised. To him, her hesitation was cowardice, or worse, emotional interference. Sierra 1, Thorne said, his voice icy and final. Your job is to cover the door. My job is to kick it in. Do not clutter the comms with conjecture unless you see a weapon. Are we clear? Lily stared at the man on the balcony. He flicked the cigarette butt away. It sparked as it hit the street below. He turned and went back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. It was an invitation. Clear, Lily whispered, the taste of bile in her throat. Breaching team, move up. Sierra 1, eyes on that balcony. Anything moves, you drop it. Copy. Lily adjusted her position, digging her toes into the dirt to load the bipod. She rested her cheek against the stock, her heart rate slowing through sheer force of will. She centered the crosshairs on the empty doorway. She was right. She knew she was right. But being right didn't stop the chain of command. Below her, in the shimmering heat of the valley, 6 men stood up from the brush and began the long, silent run toward the compound walls. They looked small and fragile against the vast, indifferent desert. Lily watched them go, feeling the terrible, heavy dread of a spectator watching a train wreck in slow motion. She tightened her grip on the rifle. The trigger broke at 2.5 pounds. The decision to send them in had been heavier, but Thorne had pulled it without flinching. Through the lens of the M13, the world was a silent movie of impending violence. Lily watched the 6 figures of her team stack up against the mud brick wall of the compound. They moved with the fluid, predatory grace of apex predators, unaware they were walking into a cage. Sierra 1, eyes on, she whispered, scanning the windows above them. Nothing. The shutters remained closed. The silence of the village was now screaming at her. Stack set, Thorne's voice crackled. Breach her up. Davis moved to the heavy wooden door. Lily watched him unspool the det cord, taping the linear charge in a C-shape around the handle and hinges. It was a standard mechanical breach, fast, violent, designed to shock the occupants. Charges set, shock tube connected, Davis reported. Standing by. Lily shifted her crosshairs back to the balcony where the warlord had stood. He hadn't reappeared. Why aren't there guards? The question hammered in her skull. Why is the door unlocked? Execute, 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 Thorne commanded. Davis squeezed the clacker. Flash. A puff of gray smoke erupted from the doorframe, followed a split second later by the door kicking inward. But before the wood even hit the floor, the world disintegrated. It wasn't the breaching charge. It was something deeper, something under the foundation. A massive plume of fire and debris erupted from the ground floor, blowing the front wall of the compound outward. The shock wave rippled across the valley floor, distorting the air like a hammer striking water. Up on the ridge, the ground jumped under Lily's chest, the concussion hitting her a full second later with a dull, heavy thump that rattled her teeth. Contact! Contact front! The radio dissolved into a cacophony of screaming and static. Thorne! Status! Lily yelled, losing the discipline of the whisper. Below, the compound was engulfed in a thick, choking brown cloud of pulverized brick and dust. Through the thermal setting of her scope, she saw heat blooms. Secondary explosions? Molotovs? No, it was gunfire. From the surrounding buildings, the ones that had been empty moments ago, muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies. The ambush was total. The enemy had let the team walk right up to the door and then detonated a command wire IED before opening up with crossfire. Man down! We have man down! It was Miller's voice, high and panicked. We are pinned in the courtyard, taking heavy fire from the east and west. Lily frantically dialed down the magnification on her scope to widen her field of view. She saw them now. Insurgents were pouring out of the empty houses, taking positions on the rooftops. They had the high ground on the team in the courtyard. Sierra 1, do you have eyes? Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. He sounded breathless, coughing, but alive. Suppress the east roof. They're flanking us. I can't see you through the dust, Commander. Pop smoke. Give me a reference, Lily screamed back. Negative on smoke. We are combat ineffective if we blind ourselves, Thorne roared. Just shoot the damn roof, Lopez. Lily traversed the rifle to the building east of the crater. Through the swirling dust, she saw the heat signature of a heavy machine gun, a DSK, being set up on the parapet. If that gun started firing, it would turn the rubble in the courtyard into a meat grinder. She didn't check the wind. She didn't check the chart. She relied on the muscle memory of the dope she had dialed in earlier. Breathe, squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The suppressor turned the explosion into a sharp hiss, but the recoil was violent. She racked the bolt. Clack, clack. Through the scope, the gunner on the roof crumpled, the heat signature sliding down the wall. Target down, she reported. But you have 3 more movers on the west side. You need to move. You are in a fatal funnel. We can't move, Thorne shouted. Davis is buried. We are digging him out. Give us cover. The dust was beginning to settle, revealing the carnage. The front of the compound was a ruin. 2 SEALs were dragging a limp body behind a pile of fallen masonry. Bullets were chewing up the ground around them, kicking up little geysers of dirt. Lily realized with a cold, sinking feeling that her position was too far. The angle was getting worse as the enemy moved closer to the team. She was losing the geometry. Commander, I can't cover your flank from here, Lily said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. I need to displace. Negative. Maintain overwatch. If you move, we have 0 cover. If I stay, you die, she said. She didn't wait for his permission. She grabbed the rifle by the barrel, ignoring the heat, and scrambled backward out of the hide. She had to get closer. She had to get into the fight. Lily didn't run. She slid. The descent from the high ridge was a controlled fall, a chaotic scramble down 300 feet of loose shale and razor-sharp limestone. The heavy MK-13 banged against her back, the optics protected only by her body as she crashed through thorn bushes and scree. Sierra 1, report. Thorne's voice was broken, jagged with the sound of incoming automatic fire. Displacing. 30 seconds. Lily gasped, her boots skidding on a flat slab of rock. She hit the lower shelf, a precarious outcrop of granite hanging over the valley floor like a diving board. It was 500 meters closer. The angle was perfect. The cover was non-existent. She slammed her ruck down, using it as a hasty rest. She didn't have time to build a hide. She didn't have time to deploy the camouflage net. She was a dark smudge on a light rock, visible to anyone who looked up. She threw the rifle onto the pack, settling the stock into her shoulder. The scope picture bounced as she fought to control her breathing. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, threatening to throw off her aim. Focus, reticle, target. Through the scope, the situation was desperate. The dust had settled enough to reveal the SEAL team huddled behind the crumbled wall of the courtyard. They were taking fire from 3 sides. To the west, on a flat roof, a PKM machine gunner was chewing up the masonry inches above Thorne's head. Lily didn't dial the turret. There was no time for math. She used the Horus H-59 reticle, holding 1.2 mils for elevation and favoring the left edge of the target for the wind. Crack. The rifle bucked. The suppressor hissed. Down in the village, the PKM gunner's head snapped back. The gun fell silent. One down, Lily broadcasted, racking the bolt. Watch the alleyway, east side, RPG. She saw the tube before the man. An insurgent stepped out from the shadows of an alley, leveling a rocket-propelled grenade launcher at the cluster of SEALs. He was moving. A moving target at 400 meters with a high heart rate was a low percentage shot. Thorne would have told her to wait, to track, to be sure. Lily fired. The bullet struck the man in the pelvis. He collapsed, the rocket firing harmlessly into the dirt a few feet in front of him, detonating in a small puff of black smoke that shredded him instantly. Good effect on target, Miller yelled over the comms. Sierra 1 is online. Keep moving, Lily commanded, her voice icy. I have the lane. Get Davis to the secondary breach. She worked the bolt like a machine. Fire, rack, fire, rack. She was no longer a sniper. She was a precision instrument of suppression. She dropped a fighter flanking on the left. She put a round through the engine block of a technical truck trying to turn the corner. But the physics of the rifle were catching up to her. The suppressor, wrapped in a heat-resistant cover, was glowing hot. The heat waves radiating from the barrel were rising up in front of her scope, creating a shimmering mirage that distorted the image. The targets were starting to dance, swimming in a pool of liquid air. "Sierra 1, we are moving," Thorne shouted. "Cover us." The team broke cover, dragging the wounded Davis toward a gap in the rear wall. It was the most vulnerable moment of the extraction. As they ran, a window on the third floor of the mosque tower, 600 meters away, opened. Lily saw the flash before she heard the sound. Snap! A bullet cracked the air inches from her ear, striking the rock face behind her and spraying granite shrapnel into her neck. She flinched, instinctively ducking, but she didn't pull back. She looked for the source. "Sniper!" she yelled. "Tower! 12 o'clock high!" She found him, a dark shape deep in the room. He had the elevation, he had the cover, and he had her range. He fired again. This time, the dirt in front of her face exploded, blinding her with dust. "Lopez, get down!" Thorne screamed. "If I get down, you die!" she shouted back. She wiped the dust from her shooting eye. She couldn't see the shooter clearly through the mirage and the dust, but she saw the muzzle flash. She held the crosshair on the flash. It was a guess, a calculated, desperate guess. She exhaled, emptying her lungs until her body went still. The world narrowed down to that single dark window. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. She didn't see the impact, but the window remained dark. No return fire. "Target neutralized?" she whispered, unsure. "We are clear. We are through the breach," Thorne reported. "Sierra 1, break contact. RTB, return to base. Immediately. You are compromised." Lily grabbed her rifle. The barrel was hot enough to burn through her gloves. She scrambled back from the edge just as the rock where she had been lying disintegrated under a hail of automatic fire. The entire village had turned its eyes, and its guns, toward her perch. She was alone on the cliffside. The team was moving away from her, and the enemy was coming up the slope. The descent was less a maneuver and more a controlled crash. Lily abandoned the concept of stealth, skidding down the final 40 meters of the slope in a shower of gravel and shale. Bullets chewed up the scrub brush around her, the snap hiss of rounds passing at supersonic speeds filling the air. She hit the valley floor running, her lungs burned, the dry desert air feeling like broken glass in her chest. Ahead, the secondary breach point, a crumbled section of the compound wall, was a scene of absolute chaos. "Sierra 1, moving to your pose," Lily shouted into the comms, but all she got back was static and the sound of screaming. She vaulted over a pile of rubble and slid into the depression where the team had gone to ground. The situation was catastrophic. Davis was unconscious, his leg a mess of torn uniform and blood. Miller was manning the SAW, squad automatic weapon, firing long, desperate bursts to suppress the alleyway to the east. And Thorne was down. The lieutenant commander was slumped against the mud brick wall, his face the color of ash. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his right thigh, soaking into the dust. He was gripping his weapon with white-knuckled intensity, but his eyes were glazing over. Lily dropped to her knees beside him, slinging her MK-13 to her back. She didn't ask if he was okay. The amount of blood told her everything she needed to know. "Miller, sector right. Don't let them cross the street," she yelled, her voice cutting through the din. She ripped the cat tourniquet from her vest. Thorne flinched as she grabbed his leg, his hand weakly swatting at her. Get back on the gun, Lopez," Thorne rasped, his voice slurring. "I'm fine." "You have a femoral bleed, sir. You're not fine. You're dying," Lily said, her tone devoid of sympathy, purely clinical. She slid the tourniquet high up his thigh, near the groin, high and tight. She cranked the windlass. Once, twice, 3 times. Thorne screamed. It was a guttural, raw sound that was lost in the roar of an RPG, impacting the wall behind them. Pulse checked, bleeding controlled, Lily muttered to herself, locking the windlass rod in place. She ripped open a packet of Celox gauze and jammed it into the wound channel. Thorne's head lolled back, his consciousness flickering. Command. 2. Overlord, Thorne whispered into his radio, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he tried to key the mic. Broken Arrow. The radio squawked. Say again, Viking Actual? Did you say Broken Arrow? Thorne dropped the mic. His hand went limp. He looked at Miller, who was frantically reloading the saw. Miller, Thorne choked out. You have the stick. Get them. Out. Miller looked back, eyes wide with terror. He was a terrifyingly efficient gunner, but he was young. He froze, the weight of command hitting him harder than the enemy fire. The enemy was closing in. Lily could hear their voices now, shouting orders in Arabic, less than 50 meters out. They were maneuvering to finish the kill. If Miller hesitated, they died. Lily didn't think. She grabbed the radio handset from Thorne's chest. Overlord, this is Sierra 1, Lily shouted, her voice steady and hard as steel. Actual is down. I repeat, Actual is casualty category Alpha. Assume command is transferred. Thorne's eyes snapped open, focused on her for a fleeting second. Lopez, stand down. She ignored him. She looked at Miller. Miller, forget the radio. Keep that gun talking or we get overrun. Do you copy? Miller blinked, the paralysis breaking. Copy. He turned back to the street, unleashing a torrent of 5.56mm rounds that shredded the approaching fighters. Lily keyed the mic again. Overlord, we have a platoon-sized element flanking east and west. We are combat ineffective. I am declaring Broken Arrow. Request immediate CAS, close air support. Danger close. Coordinates to follow. Sierra 1, be advised, danger close requires ground commander authorization. Confirm your initials. Initials Lima Lima, she said, looking Thorne dead in the eye as she authorized the strike that could kill them all to save them. Bring the rain. She dropped the handset and grabbed Thorne by the drag handle of his plate carrier. The wall they were behind was disintegrating under heavy machine gun fire. We move! Now! She ordered the remnants of the team. Fallback point Bravo! Go! Go! She didn't wait for Thorne to agree. She drove her legs into the dirt, hauling his 200 pounds of dead weight backward. The dust choked her. The noise was a physical weight pressing against her skull. Thorne groaned, his boots dragging in the dirt. He looked up at her, his face inches from hers as she pulled him through the dirt. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haze of pain and confusion. He was watching the woman he had tried to dismiss, the woman he had humiliated, literally carrying his life in her hands, while calling down airstrikes on their own position. Why? Thorne mumbled, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Save your breath, Commander, Lily grunted, hauling him around the corner of a stone archway, just as the position they had left vanished in a cloud of RPG smoke. I'm not writing your condolence letter today. She slammed him down into the cover of the alleyway, checking his pulse again. It was thready, but there. The sky above them ripped open. The sound of fast movers, jets, screamed overhead. The airstrike had bought them 3 minutes of confusion, no more. The J-Dams had turned the village outskirts into a smoking crater of slag and glass. But the enemy was like the desert itself, shifting, relentless, and impossible to fully destroy. Move! We move now, Lily commanded. Her voice was a rasp, throat raw from the dust and the screaming. She had Thorne's left arm over her shoulder, her right arm gripping his belt. Miller had his other side. Together they dragged the semi-conscious commander through the dry wash, their boots slipping on the loose shale. Behind them, Davis, limping on a makeshift crutch and supported by the last effective shooter, Tex, struggled to keep pace. They were a broken procession, leaving a trail of disturbed earth and blood that a blind tracker could follow. Status on ammo, Lily wheezed, not stopping. 2 mags left, half a belt on the saw, Miller replied, his face streaked with sweat and soot. We go Winchester in 5 minutes of sustained contact. Then don't make contact, Lily said grimly. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The heat, however, refused to break. The air was still suffocating, heavy with the metallic tang of blood emanating from Thorne's leg. The tourniquet was holding, but he was gray. his eyes rolling back in his head. "Lopez!" Thorne mumbled, his feet dragging uselessly. "Leave! Drop me!" "Shut up, sir," Lily grunted, heaving him over a fallen log. "You don't get to quit. That's an order." They reached the junction of the wadi. To the north lay the secondary HLZ, a flat plateau where the extraction helo could land. It was a mile away, uphill. In this terrain, with 2 casualties, it was an impossible mile. To the south, the canyon narrowed. Behind them, the sound of shouting grew louder. The insurgents had regrouped. They weren't shooting anymore. They were sprinting. They knew the SEALs were wounded. They smelled blood. "Hold," Lily whispered, dropping to one knee and easing Thorne to the ground. The team collapsed into the shadow of a limestone overhang. The breathing of the men was loud, ragged, desperate. Lily checked the GPS on her wrist. "Bird is 10 mics out," she said. "We can't move fast enough to beat the pursuit to the plateau. If they catch us in the open on the incline, we're done." Miller looked at her, fear warring with exhaustion in his eyes. "So we dig in? Make a last stand?" "We don't have the ammo for a stand," Lily said. She looked at Thorne. He was barely conscious, his life leaking out drop by drop. If they stopped, he died. If they ran, they were shot in the back. She looked at the terrain. The wadi split here. The main path went to the HLZ. A narrow goat trail went east, toward the jagged cliffs they had inserted from. A plan formed in her mind. It wasn't a good plan. It was a suicide pact. "Miller," Lily said, unbuckling her heavy ruck and dropping it to the ground. She stripped down to her plate carrier, her war belt, and her rifle. "Take the commander. You and Tex carry him. Get Davis up the hill. Do not stop for anything." "What? What about you?" Miller asked, realizing what she was doing. "I'm going east," Lily said, checking the magazine in her MK-13. 3 rounds. She pulled her pistol. 1 mag. "I'm going to make a lot of noise. I'll draw them into the box canyon." "No," Miller said, grabbing her arm. "That's suicide, Chief. There's 50 of them. And there's 4 of you who need to get on that chopper," she said, ripping her arm free. Her voice was hard, stripped of any emotion. This was math. "They want the kill. I'm going to give them a target." She looked down at Thorne. His eyes were open, lucid for a brief, terrifying second. He gripped her wrist with a strength that surprised her. "Lily," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever used her first name. "Don't. You said biology was a liability, Elias," she said softly, using his name back. It felt like a goodbye. "I'm just using mine. I'm faster than you." She stood up. The sound of the enemy was close now, less than 200 meters. "Go," she ordered Miller. "Get them home." Miller hesitated, then nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. He hoisted Thorne up. The team began the agonizing climb toward the plateau. Lily watched them for 1 second, ensuring they were moving. Then she turned and ran. She ran east toward the dead end. She didn't run silently. She smashed through the brush, kicking rocks, making herself a beacon. She reached a bend in the goat trail, turned and raised her rifle. She saw the lead tracker of the pursuit element, a man in a black vest sprinting through the wadi. She didn't suppress. She aimed. Crack. The man dropped. The canyon erupted in shouts. "There! She is there!" Lily didn't wait. She turned and sprinted deeper into the rocks, the entire enemy force pivoting to follow the lone figure disappearing into the darkness. She was the rabbit now, and the wolves were howling. Lily was a ghost again. She had led the enemy trackers into the box canyon, a dead-end trap of vertical rock walls, and then she had vanished. While they scoured the canyon floor, firing blindly into the shadows, she had scaled the eastern face, a grueling, fingertip-shredding climb that had left her nails broken and her muscles trembling with lactic acid burn. Now she lay prone on the high ridge, 600 meters overlooking the secondary extraction zone. Her lungs heaved against the dust, but her hands were steady. She brought the M13 to her shoulder. The rifle was heavy, the barrel cooling rapidly in the dropping night temperature. This was the cold-bore shot, the most unpredictable round a sniper could fire. The metal had contracted. The zero might have shifted half a minute of angle. There was no warm-up, No sighter rounds. Just one chance. Below on the plateau, she saw the infrared strobes of her team. Miller and Tex had dragged Thorne to the center of the flat ground. They were waiting. And in the distance, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the MH-60 Black Hawk grew louder. Salvation was inbound. But through her scope, Lily saw what the pilots couldn't. On the opposing ridge, hidden in a cluster of scrub brush directly overlooking the landing zone, was a lone figure. He wasn't holding a rifle. He was holding a remote detonator. A wire ran from his position down the slope, disappearing into the very center of the landing zone where her team lay waiting. It was a daisy chain IED trap. The moment the helicopter touched down, he would blow the LZ, vaporizing the bird and the team. Sierra 1, hold fire. I repeat, hold fire. You do not have PID. The voice in her earpiece was the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, JTAC, from the inbound bird, jagged and heavy with command. They saw a heat signature, but they couldn't see the detonator. To them, it might be a civilian, a goat herder, or a shadow. Command, I have visual confirmation on the triggerman, Lily whispered, her breath barely fogging the scope's lens. The wind was picking up, swirling through the valley. He's holding the detonator. Dead man's switch. Negative, Sierra 1. ISR is blind in that sector. We have civilians in the area. If you take that shot and you're wrong, you compromise the entire extraction. Do not engage. Lily's finger hovered over the trigger. Through the magnification, she saw the man's thumb twitch. He was watching the helicopter's approach lights. He was waiting for the wheels to kiss the dirt. Commander, Lily said, addressing Thorne, hoping he was conscious enough to hear her on the team net. If I don't drop him, they burn. And if you miss or if you're wrong, we start a war we can't finish. Stand down, Lopez. That is a direct order. It wasn't Thorne. It was the frantic voice of the pilot, terrified of a friendly fire incident or a war crime. Lily closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. For 5 years, she had chased the approval of men like Thorne. She had followed every protocol, aced every qualification, swallowed every insult, and perfected every calculation just to be allowed to hold the rifle. They wanted a soldier who followed orders. They wanted a machine, but a machine wouldn't take the shot. A machine would calculate the risk of court-martial and stand down. She opened her eyes, the reticle settled. She wasn't a machine. She was a liability, and right now, that was exactly what they needed. She reached up and pulled the connector from her radio. The voices, the orders, the threats, the protocol vanished. The silence was absolute. She looked at the wind flags in her mind, the bending of the grass, the dust kicking up, full value right to left, distance 610 meters, cold bore shift, down and left. She adjusted her hold. She didn't dial. She felt it. She exhaled, pushing the air out of her lungs until she was empty, a vacuum in the desert night. Lopez! Akin! The ghost of the order echoed in her memory. Crack. The rifle surged backward, the recoil slamming into her bruised shoulder. She didn't blink. She rode the recoil, keeping her eye through the scope to trace the trace. The bullet crossed the 600 meters in less than a second. It struck the man in the head. The terminal ballistics were immediate. The figure collapsed backward, his thumb slipping off the detonator without depressing it. The dead man's switch didn't trigger. It was a manual press, and the hand that needed to press it was gone. Target down, she whispered to no one. A second later, the roar of the Black Hawk filled the valley. The helicopter flared, its wheels touching down exactly where the explosion was meant to be. The wash of the rotors kicked up a massive cloud of sand, masking the team as Miller and Tex threw Thorne into the cabin. Lily watched them load. She saw Miller look back, scanning the darkness, screaming into his radio, looking for her. She reconnected her comms. Sierra 1, get to the LZ. We are burning fuel, the pilot screamed. Negative, Lily said, her voice calm, detached. I'm 2 clicks out and high. You have the package. Go. We are not leaving you, Chief, Miller yelled. You have the commander. He's the priority. I'll make my own way to the secondary pickup. Get him to surgery. That's an order. She watched the helicopter lift off, banking hard away from the ridge. It was safe. Thorne was safe. She lay there for a moment, listening to the fading beat of the rotors. She was alone in the desert, with an empty magazine and a career that was likely over the moment she pulled that trigger. Slowly, painfully, she stood up. She had a long walk ahead of her, but as she slung the rifle, the weight felt different. It was no longer a burden of proof. It was just a tool, and she was the master of it. The room was white, not the blinding, sun-bleached white of the Sahel salt flats, but the artificial, oppressive white of government bureaucracy. The air conditioning hummed with a sterile vibration that seemed to drill into Lily's skull, a stark contrast to the ringing tinnitus that had been her constant companion since the extraction. Chief Petty Officer Lily Lopez sat at the center of the mahogany table. She wore her service dress blues, the fabric stiff and immaculate. Her ribbon rack was perfectly aligned, the polished brass buttons reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Her hands rested on her knees, hidden under the table, clenching and unclenching to stop the tremors. Across from her sat Captain Vance, the JAG officer assigned to the inquiry, and a Master Chief from Naval Special Warfare Command. On the table between them lay a thick file, the after-action report for Operation Silent Sand. "Chief Lopez," Captain Vance said, tapping a pen against the file, "let's review the timeline at 2100 hours. You voluntarily disconnected your communications equipment. You ignored a direct check-fire order from the JTAC. You engaged a target based on visual indicators that were not confirmed by ISR. Is this accurate?" "Yes, sir," Lily said. Her voice was flat. She offered no defense. The facts were the facts. "You realize," the Master Chief added, his voice like gravel, "that if you had been wrong, if that man had been a civilian with a cell phone, you would be in a cell in Leavenworth right now." "But I wasn't wrong, Master Chief," Lily replied, her gaze fixed on the wall behind them. "The target was neutralizing a command wire IED. The team is alive." "The outcome does not justify the process, Chief," Vance sighed, opening the folder. "The Navy runs on discipline. Maverick behavior gets people killed. We are recommending a punitive letter of reprimand and a review of your clearance status. You're a hell of a shooter, Lopez, but you're a liability to the chain of command." "Biology is a liability." The words echoed in her memory, 5 years old but fresh as a wound. The door to the conference room opened. It wasn't a polite entrance. It was a breach. The sound came first, the heavy rhythmic thump of a rubber-tipped cane hitting the linoleum, followed by the dragging shuffle of a boot. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt, the skin pale and waxy. He was wearing hospital scrubs with a uniform jacket hastily thrown over them. His right leg was encased in a heavy brace from hip to ankle. "Commander," Vance said, standing up, "you're supposed to be in surgery follow-up." "I'm fine," Thorne rasped. He hobbled into the room, the effort clearly costing him agony. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Lily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The last time she had seen him, she was shoving him into a helicopter while he bled out. Now he was standing over her again, but the power dynamic had shifted. The air in the room grew heavy. "Clear the room, Captain," Thorne said. "Excuse me?" Vance bristled. "This is an official inquiry." "And I am the ground force commander of the operation in question," Thorne said, leaning heavily on the cane. "My testimony supersedes your speculation. I said, clear the room." Vance looked at the Master Chief, who gave a subtle nod. They gathered their files and walked out, closing the heavy door behind them. Silence returned to the white room. Thorne pulled out a chair and collapsed into it, exhaling a breath that sounded like a rattle. He placed his cane on the table. "You cut your radio," Thorne said. It wasn't a question. "I did," Lily answered. "You disobeyed a direct order from the JTAC." "I did." Thorne stared at her. His eyes, usually cold and assessing, were different. There was a depth to them now, a fracture in the stone. He reached into his jacket pocket. 5 years ago," Thorne said quietly, "I told you that you didn't have the temperament for this. I told you that when the pressure hit, you would hesitate, or you would break." "I remember," Lily said. "I was wrong." The admission hung in the air, shocking in its simplicity. Thorne didn't apologize easily. He didn't compliment ever. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the mahogany table toward her. It wasn't a letter of reprimand. It was a transfer order. Lily looked down at it. It was a recommendation for officer candidate school, fast-tracked with a follow-on assignment to the Naval War College as a tactical instructor. It was a golden ticket. It was a way out of the mud, out of the killing, and into the prestigious, clean world of command. It was Thorne's way of saying she had graduated. She had won. "You're too smart to be pulling a trigger forever, Lily," Thorne said, using her name again. "You proved your point. You saved my life. You saved the team. Take the win. Go teach the next generation how to not get killed." Lily looked at the paper. It was everything a sailor should want. Promotion, respect, safety. It was an acknowledgement that she was his equal. She looked up at Thorne. He was watching her, expecting gratitude, expecting relief. He still didn't get it. He thought she did this to prove something to him. Lily reached out and took the paper. She felt the texture of the grain. "Thank you, Elias," she said softly. Then with slow, deliberate movements, she tore the paper in half. Thorne flinched. The sound was identical to the sound in his office 5 years ago. Rip. She put the two halves together and tore them again. Rip. She stood up, brushing the confetti of his reward onto the table. "I didn't take that shot to get a promotion," Lily said, adjusting her cover so it sat perfectly straight on her head. "And I didn't save you so I could go sit behind a desk. I'm a shooter. That's what I am. That's where I stay." Thorne looked at the torn paper, then up at her. A slow, faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile of recognition. He saw the monster he had helped create, and he respected it. "The inquiry?" he asked. "I'll handle it," she said. "I always do." Lily turned and walked to the door. She didn't look back. She walked out of the sterile white room and into the hallway. She needed to clean her rifle. There would be another mission. There was always another mission, and in the silence of the desert, she wouldn't need a thank you. She would just need her win call.